So here is the release pipelines portion of the CI/CD. So we've set up our continuous integration, which is just that build pipeline, our tests, our artifacts, and then we set up continuous delivery, which is that automatic deployment to the test server. And what we're looking at now is the manual deployment to the production server. So under pipelines in Azure DevOps, you'll notice releases, and you can hit new pipeline, and you can start off with a Azure App Service deployment or whatever other template you want, or even an empty job if that is what you require. So we are going to start off with our Azure App Service deployment, and we are going to we have our stage, we have our stage owner, which is me, and what we're first going to do is add our artifact. So it's going to be a build artifact, and this project is just whatever project that we're working in. For us, it is ENSE 475. And for our build pipeline, we can select our mini API build pipeline, and we'll default to the latest version, and we will add this artifact type. And so this is going to be our continuous deployment trigger. And so we can say enabling this trigger will create a new release every time a new build is available, or we can do a pull request trigger. So we have to want it to happen, essentially. We have to do it manually. So when we look at this, we can look at the one job and one task of our first stage. And so first it asks for our Azure subscription, and we are just going to use our Azure for Students. And then it's going to select our app type. And when we did our deployment for this mini API, we used Linux. And so when we look here, if we look at web app on Windows, there isn't going to be anything that shows up for app service name. And if we switch this to web app on Linux, we can notice that here we go. Here are our JavaScript test, mini API, and our regular test. So we're going to select this mini API, and we can go back to our pipeline. And so we have our stage, we have our job and our task, and this is going to be our deployment. And we can call this deploy to production. Perfect. And so post-deployment conditions, you can set those. We're going to set our pre-deployment conditions, and we're going to say manually only. And we can say pre-deployment approvals, so we can select the users who can approve or reject deployments to the stage. And we can enable this, and we can say Avery. And so we're going to say that there's a 30-day timeout. So if there isn't any deployment, then you can't do that if you've waited after 30 days. And you can look at approval policies, and you can skip approval if the same approver approved the previous stage, which might not be the best option, but could speed things up if that's what you're looking for. And then you have the user requesting a release or deployment should not approve it. That's probably a good idea just for sanity's sake. Get another set of eyes to look at it. But we're going to leave this unchecked since I'm doing both the request and the approval. So we can set our pre-deployment conditions, and we can define the triggers, and that is what our we're just going to scroll right back here. And we have our triggers here and our pre-deployment approvals. And what we can do here, we are going to enable this trigger. Will create a new release every time a new build is available. And so we're going to enable that, and we won't put any branch filters on this. What this does is you can look at only the master branch or only some feature branch. It just allows you to select the branches a bit more. And we can set a release schedule, so we could specify the times if we wanted to work on off hours to deploy and not interrupt regular business hours. We can do that as well. Right now, we're not going to do that. And we can set this as mini API release pipeline. So that we have our name, we have our artifact that we're building off of, and we have our deployment stage and just conditions. So we're going to save this, and we can just save this to our base folder. You can save it to whatever folder you want, and you can hit create release. And we are going to click on this stage to change. Click create, and it'll say one release has been created. And we can click on this. And if you were deploying to a production server, you can change the environment. And we can hit deploy here. And when you're looking at this, you would have a test server and a deployment server. Right now we're deploying to the same spot, but it's super easy to just change that. And we can look at this and we say, oh, what commits are on this? We have 30 commits that are being deployed. You can see all of these. You could see any work items that are associated with this if you had bug fixes that were happening. And then you can add a comment, and we can just add first deploy for us. And we're looking at what the artifact is, so you can see when it was done, and make sure that you're not accidentally deploying a artifact that you've considered not viable for production. And when you hit deploy, it'll say pending approval, and it'll say on Avery Cameron, and we can hit approve, and we can reassign this, but or defer deployment for later. You can add comments, you can reject it, and we are just going to hit approve, and it is approved, and it is just waiting to be deployed and built by Azure. And so that's sort of the setup of that continuous deployment portion of CI/CD. It looks for approval, so this would be after you've done some assurance testing, and you just want to make sure that your non-functional requirements are accepted as well and met, as well as your just general functional requirements that you tested with the unit tests. And this gives you the freedom to sort of request that a new portion be deployed to production, and you can add rejection, you can add different requirements, you could add different stages as well. You could add, if you had staging, so you could have a stage to deploy to staging, and then it would have another stage past that over here, and that could be your deploy to production. So you can have multiple steps to deployment and sort of your testing framework that you're doing. And so this is going to take a little while to do, but it's just going to deploy this work item. All of these commits are artifact that we generated just beforehand. And so this is going to run for about 3 minutes, and we can look at the logs as this is running, and it's just succeeded, and it is now live. And you can just look at the history, and you can look at different tests that were run as well. And that is our CI/CD pipeline. It starts off simple with building and testing, then it goes to continuous delivery with deployment to a test server, and then we looked at continuous deployment and talked about where you could go from there and what you could look at for releases, sort of different stages with test, staging and prod, or just test and prod, and you could look at code coverage as well. You can just customize your pipeline fully, and we found that it met all of our requirements for CI/CD and just sort of integrates well with all of the benefits that we were looking for and requirements that we had for it, and for sort of agile development. Really increases your quality of code and just your feedback, and provides feedback to the developers and the QA, or whoever is set up to receive emails, or you can look at the pipeline screen here itself. And it's just a simple API to look at how your code is doing and get that feedback of where you need to improve and what you can change and where your development cycle is at. And that's it for our introduction into CI/CD and Azure DevOps.